So this microphone is for the sake of the folks online. So when we do the Q&A afterwards, I'll try to run this to people so that we can.
We're gonna let them ask questions.
If you want, we don't have to. It's up to you.
They haven't paid me enough, honestly.
All right, no questions. Don't question what he says.
Right.
So thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a lot of folks online as well. We really appreciate Dan being here and sharing his awesome wisdom and knowledge with us. Maybe I'm saying that too early. You're looking skeptical.
Yeah, just wait till after. Then you can tell me how awesome the wisdom is.
But we thank you very much for coming. And without any further jibber jabber, Dan Brown.
Cool. Thank you, Nick. Thanks everyone for coming. I know it's the Friday before a holiday, so really, what are you people doing here? Don't you need to be getting on vacation or something like that? But thanks for coming and spending it with me. Hopefully I will keep you somewhat entertained for the next 45, 50 minutes. And then if we have some time, we can definitely ask some questions. There will be a fair bit of audience participation. You ready for some audience participation? I don't sense enthusiasm. Thank you. Thank you. I knew Hallie came for a reason. So I know half of you. So this is going to be like a family chat too. I have been based in DC my entire professional career. I was once a Fed. However, back when I was a Fed, we had dark brown hallways. We didn't have these nice, light, airy things. I seem to remember at Postal, a basement windowless office that I was assigned to with like 4 other people. So all cramped into an office. So things have really changed a lot in the 15 years since I was a Fed. I like thinking about how teams relate to each other. Can everyone hear me okay? Right? You're good? Because this is as loud as I talk, which is a great advantage to my children. So they're like, sorry, Dad, didn't hear you. So I like thinking about how teams relate to each other. I also like walking around a lot. Is that okay? You're gonna be okay with that? I started thinking about, or started realizing that I started hearing the same kinds of things over and over on my projects. I'm a designer, right? So tell me if you've heard any of these. Have you heard this one? We like how Apple.com does it, right? Everyone has heard this one. Maybe not Apple.com. Maybe Google for some of us in the room, right? Maybe some other big brand, right? Well, I'm literally trying to design an application for a dental claim adjuster. Like Apple.com does not even play into this at all. What about this one? We just don't have the funding to do some user research, so you're just gonna have to use the information we give you. Have you heard that one? Yes. It's amazing how these same stories keep coming up over and over again. This is one of my favorites. So you get into the meeting, status meeting, weekly status meeting. Things have changed since we last spoke. How many people have actually heard someone say that to you? Yes, we all get this. You're like, maybe it's not every project, but we've certainly experienced these on at least one project that we've been on. We had bi-weekly status meetings, twice a week status meetings, and they said this literally in every meeting. And I was like, how could anything have changed? We literally just met yesterday. But things move fast, I guess. This is a good one. Wait a minute, where are we gonna put the Twitter feed? It's literally for claims adjusters. They have to be filing like dealing with claims. Why do we need a Twitter feed? Why with the Twitter feed? Back when I started in this business, everyone wanted to put the weather on their pages. So I guess maybe we've moved along a bit. And then these days you hear RWD. Anyone know what that stands for? Responsive web design. Everything's got to be responsive. Actually, that's probably not a bad idea. But again, when I got started in this business, it was all about the Ajax. Do you even know what that means? Do you even know what you're asking for when you ask for Ajax? Again, I'm going to date myself, Java. It used to all be all about the Java. Anyone remember when Java came out and they're like, we've got to do it in Java. And we're like, we don't even know what we're building yet. And then even in the early days, we had Flash, right? It was always, this is my favorite one. We should build a portal. You seriously don't know what a portal is. No one knows what a portal is. We all just use that word to mean a website. So, right, this is one of those things where we hear this a lot. I don't know what it's going to be tomorrow. I literally don't know. I can take you back in time to when I started, but there's going to be something else. So we've all heard this, right, at some point or another in our careers, maybe multiple times. And I started realizing there's a name for this. I call it distracted by shiny objects. And I actually have a really good illustration that I don't normally have. But look, are you? Channel your inner feline. Right? So the laser pointer, right? We're all sort of distracted by shiny objects. I call that a situation that we find ourselves in. Can anyone give me an example of this from your own careers, own jobs? Hallie's got an example. She didn't even need to think about it.
Oh, yeah. Everybody wants video content.
Oh, content. Interesting. Meaning they, even if it's just text, they're like, we've got to find a way to put video in this.
Somebody will read a report while showing, like, panning over the really pretty Excel document.
Oh, right. So there needs to be panning or who knows what, movement, motion. We all want it. Distracted by shiny objects. You know, I'm a designer. I just want to know, what are we building first? Let's figure out what problem are we trying to solve. So how do you deal with these situations? Well, one of the things that I like to do, I call this offer alternatives, right? So someone says, we really want to build, we must have Flash, right? I cannot count how many times people have said that to me. And I'll say, well, let's take a step back. Let's look at all the different alternatives that we have. What are the different things that we're trying to design, right? What is the range of things that we're looking at? And so let me show you, let's look at all of those things and then talk about how Flash fits in. So that's one technique you can use. I use another technique. I call it ask for a story. All right, so you want to use Flash on this project. Tell me a story about how a user would make use of this and why Flash is important. Tell me a story, right? I want to hear from you about what you think the user will do. It doesn't have to be quite so confrontational, but the idea is I've got this simple mechanism now to ask for more information. Does that make sense? So here's another situation that I run into a lot. My phone buzzes when tweeting happens, I guess. That's one thing that happens. False consensus. Anyone know what this is? Can anyone describe this situation to me? I have another name for this. I call it the smile and nod, right? You're sitting in a meeting, you're presenting. Let's be honest, a lot of you are smiling and nodding right now. But what I'm getting at is you're sitting in a meeting, you present some ideas, and they're all just like, and you're like, do you really understand what I just said to you? Because you're just smiling and nodding. Like I've just told my kid to clean his room. And he's like, yep, totally, Dad. I'm totally going to do that right now. You don't understand what I just said. You can use the same technique here, right? You can use another technique or this technique, ask for a story, right? We just did that in the previous situation. We can do that here too. All right, so here are the designs, but I want to get a feeling from you guys based on what you know about your users. How do you think you're going to use this? Why don't you guys tell me a story? Why don't you tell me a story about how you think this is going to be used? Or you could use a whole nother technique, right? If you feel like your stakeholders or the various people involved in this project are not as engaged, you can plan for this. You can say, you know what? I know I'm going to get the smile and nod. So why don't I arrange this as a workshop? Why not, instead of showing up with a bunch of designs, why don't I ask them to participate in the design process and let's see what they come up with. And then I can smile and nod. No, you wouldn't do that. You would show them how to engage in a design conversation. These are not malicious, these situations, right? These are not people trying to undermine the design process. What they are, they just don't know how to participate. And this is really important, that this is not just stakeholders or non-designers, right? It's very easy for us to separate the designers from the non-designers. And I think that's not what I'm getting at here, because there are plenty of situations that I've been in where it's the designers who are smiling and nodding. So these are two situations that I have faced on projects. I get the feeling you guys have faced them as well, but they're really just two situations among many that I've dealt with. So I'm an information architect, and so I really like making lists. It irritates some of the people in my life, sure. But when I started thinking about all the things, all the kinds of situations that I encountered, I started making this list of all the situations. There were a lot. There's, about 24, maybe more on this list. And I put them on cards because it's the 21st century and you can put anything on a playing card. So I put them on these cards and they're helpful, right? They allow me to talk to you about cards, but they also allow me to kind of flip through them, think about the kinds of situations that I face on my projects. So I was going to give you an example of another situation that I faced, but I was going to do it in a theatrical way. Does that sound good? You're like, I'm still digesting my lunch. I have no idea. So I'm going to ask you to pick one of these situations. Don't show it to me. Tell me how difficult. No, I'm just kidding. So why don't you tell me what the situation is?
Separated from key stakeholders.
That's a good one. Separated from key stakeholders. Anyone familiar with that situation, right? I just need to talk to that VP over there. If I could just talk to that VP over there, maybe we can get the funding or maybe we can get approved. But there are all of these other managers in my way, right? So how would you deal with that situation? What's a technique that you would use? I told you about the audience participation, right? I gave you that warning. What would you do to deal with that situation? Do you want to read the rest of the description?
Someone on the team acts as an intermediary between everyone else and crucial stakeholders. The motivation for being a wedge may be benign or may be a way to hoard power.
So they may be getting in the way, not because they're trying to be mean, but because they just happen to be in the way. What would you do in that situation? How would you deal with that person who's standing in your way? It's hard, right? You're familiar with the situation, right? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you could just ask, or you could say, is there some reason why it doesn't make sense for me to talk to the VP directly, right? So let's do this continued theatrical. So remember the ask for a story, right? And the offer alternatives, those are patterns, right? And I've got a deck of patterns. I'm gonna ask you to pick two. And why don't you give them to me? So totally at random, I did not plant these at all. So one is make a plan, right? So how would I use make a plan in this situation? Well, maybe I could say, all right, let me make a plan for the opportunities that I need input from this big stakeholder, right? And let me share that plan with the middle person to show them, here's why I need their input, right? So that's make a plan. And then there's offer a sneak peek, right? That's the other technique here. So in this situation, I could say, you know what? Let me show you what I want to show the VP. Let me give you a sense of what that message is, and you can help me craft that message. So in addition to asking questions, we can use some of these other techniques to unstick this situation. So that's why we've got these patterns and situations. Pattern is the word that I use to refer to different techniques that you can use in these situations. There's a third leg to the stool, and that's traits. These are the aspects of your personality that sometimes create these situations, sometimes help you in these situations, and sometimes exacerbate the situations. So this is my model of conflict, right? It's fairly straightforward, but the idea here is we encounter the same kinds of situations time and again. We use patterns to deal with those situations, and we have these personality traits that help or hinder us in them. Let me dig into some of the details here. I believe that design is really, at its simplest level, a series of making decisions, right? We make some really big decisions like what's the vision for the website, who's the main audience for the website, and those decisions continue to trickle down to get us to some of the more basic decisions like what color should the button be or what should the label be of the navigation, right? But it's constant making decisions. So this is an example of a site that my team worked on. I was not the lead on this project, but it was to redesign or design a mega menu, one of these big navigation menus for Cisco.com. We did this a bunch of years ago. And they've actually literally just redesigned their homepage. And the mega menu is almost exactly intact as we helped design it a few years ago. But there's this really interesting design decision here, which is to put market segments at the bottom, right? So Cisco serves lots of different clients. Do you know anyone else who does that? Literally all of us, right? And some of them are considered enterprise size, some are mid-size, and some are small. And they wanted to change up the mega menu depending on who was looking at it. And so we experimented with lots and lots of different ways. And we ended up putting these tabs on the bottom. And you might be thinking to yourself, tabs on the bottom? Who does that? Well, we tried it, right? And the thing is, it seemed like a weird decision. But we experimented with lots of different approaches. But the decision that we ended up doing is put the market segments in tabs along the bottom. How did we get there? We actually did a fair bit of testing. We actually tested tabs on the side, tabs on the top, tabs on the other side. We tested all of those variations. And tabs along the bottom tested best. But the actual design decision is not the relevant part here. What's interesting is there was the decision that we made and how we got there. I call these things the method and the content, right? You're going to be making a ton of decisions, and here's the specifics of the decision, and you're going to use different approaches for making those decisions. Why is this important? Well, when you have conversations with your teammates, be they blue people or orange people, I don't know, there's a decision, there's a mechanism in between, right? That you're talking about how you're going to make the decision, the method, and what the actual decision is. I think this is really important because when people react to things, as I reacted to the tabs across the bottom, you are going to get different kinds of reactions to them. So if someone were questioning the method, they would say, how many variations did you test? Did you just test different colors of tabs across the bottom, or did you genuinely evaluate whether the tabs were better on the side or the top? But there are other ways that people might react. They may take it personally. Why wasn't I involved in planning this test? Have you heard that one before? Does that feel familiar? It has nothing to do with the decision itself or even the method itself, and everything to do with them and their reaction to it. Someone is expressing frustration because of their lack of involvement here. They may also completely misunderstand the purpose, right? So we were testing the placement. Someone might say, none of these things actually happened on this one, but it provided a good example. I thought we were testing label names. Maybe someone doesn't understand the scope of the test. They understood that there was testing happening, but really they didn't get what was going on under the surface. And then someone may be frustrated because they had a different expectation. They said, wait a minute, I directed you to put the tabs here and you put them here instead, right? They're feeling disconnected from the project. They're feeling like you're moving forward without their input. Does that make sense? So let me summarize these things. Blue person here might be feeling disconnected from the project. They may feel excluded from the decision-making process. Why wasn't I involved? They may feel, they may be misdirected, right? They may be not focused on the right things, or they may be ambiguous, right? They have no idea what the purpose of this is. Conflict arises from a person's reaction to a situation. And here are these things summed up. It can be hard to discern this, right? You're in the middle of a situation, you're in the middle of a moment, you don't really know what's going on. But if you take a moment to reflect, you can start to have an idea. What's really happening here? Are they actually questioning the actual decision, or is there something larger in the situation, in the scenario that we're in, the circumstance that we're in, that's causing this feedback to happen? Can someone tell me a story about someone who might have felt like this on a project? This is a safe space. What happens here also happens to be broadcast over the internet live, but maybe you should forget about that for now. Can anyone tell me a story in a nicely anonymous way of where you were dealing with someone, or maybe you yourself were feeling one of these things? It was the broadcast live over the internet, right? That just shut everyone down. Hard to talk about this stuff when you know other people are listening. Any stories? Mars. We need to mic you, Mars.
Everybody out there in internet land will hear you.
Excellent. I feel so much better about this story. So with regard to misdirected, I was brought in to test an application for an agency that I will not name. And
What are their initials? I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. Come on.
It's 3 letters. And the client really wanted us to focus the test on, could people figure out how to submit a form? Novel concept. The problem that I was seeing was people had no idea when to use the application, and I was trying to shift the conversation to how would they get it, where would they look, how would they know that it was the right thing to use.
Good.
So having that conversation with her around really where we should start the testing, she's like, oh, everybody knows it, everybody knows it. And I had her watch the test, and I asked the people in the test, before we even start, why would you use this? And they looked at me and go, I have no idea.
Because you asked me to, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And they said in the test, which was fantastic because the client was sitting there silently, if you guys weren't sitting here, I would have already left. I would already have given up.
So
So it had nothing to do with the forms.
right, your stakeholder was disconnected from the fundamental problem, right? And maybe we find this a lot, right? I mean, your conversations with her, she might have been feeling increasingly disconnected from the project itself as you are trying to focus and show her these things. If she's not even if the reactions are not even resonating with her, she may feel completely disconnected from the project as well. Thank you for sharing. See, nice and safe. So we didn't use any acronyms or anything. So when we're talking about situations that we're in, I think of these as internal and external, and the labeling may be a little confusing, but the idea is a conflict can be related to something inside the decision itself, or can be related to a person's reaction to a decision that you're making, right? This is just a tool, right? It's just a framework to help you think about, if I'm facing a difficult situation, or if I have a difficult conversation in front of me, or if someone is reacting to something, what's really going on, right? You're not therapists, presumably. You don't have to diagnose the neuroses that are happening underneath, right? Sometimes you need to talk about those, but ultimately what you're trying to figure out is what's really making this hard? What's really erecting this obstacle that's making it challenging for us to move forward with the project? So let's look at some of these other things. So the patterns themselves are, like I said, techniques. Can anyone tell me why they think I use the word pattern here instead of technique, besides the fact that technique is a very long word? What's a pattern?
I know, reuse it, right?
Right, exactly. In design, he said you would reuse it, right? And in design, a pattern is, sometimes we call them starting points, right? This is not a perfect answer to your question, but it gives you a starting point for thinking about, how would I tackle this situation differently, right? And we've already talked about this one, right? So someone brings up something, your first instinct might be to dive in, react to it, get defensive, what have you, but you can just simply stand back and ask a question, right? What did you mean by this? Or tell me more about, right? Those are very simple techniques, the most basic technique that we have to deflating, right? What do you mean they can't find the form? Help me understand what you mean by this. Or what do you mean people need to know, people already know what the form is? I'm not seeing that in my data. Can you help me understand what you mean by that, or why you think that's true? This is another technique that becomes important in difficult situations, especially when projects are moving fast. This is our opportunity to maybe slow things down a little bit. So you might say something like, when you get into the next status meeting, last time we talked about these things, right? I call this, very simply, recounting a previous conversation. That context is supremely important when we're making decisions. Why? Because we make decisions in the scope of a situation, a context. And we don't want to lose that context for the decisions, right? Remember, in one of the scenarios that we talked about was things changing every time. you show up to a situation, right? By recounting previous conversations, you can potentially deflate that or at least minimize the risk there. It creates a common starting point with your conversations. And just one more pattern here. I'm a big fan of consequences and helping people understand consequences. If I had my way, if I was ever going to be late to something or someone was making me late to get home, I would put the burden on them to call my wife and tell them. Like, I just want them to know what kinds of consequences happen for these things. Accountability, if you will, right? And so I think communicating the implications is an important thing, important value that we bring to the table as designers, right? Okay, we can use Flash for this, but here's what you need to understand about it. Here's what's going to happen as a consequence of that decision. We're not always in control of every single decision that we make. We may understand them, we may agree to them, but we may not agree with them. But our role as designers is to help people understand what's going to happen as a consequence of those decisions. So these are some of the techniques that we just discussed. And I think it's really important for us to understand that there's no one right answer to all of these things. So these are just a few principles in how we use the techniques in different situations. So for example, when I first came up with this set of cards, it's actually a game that you can play. And I was showing it to one of my colleagues, and we played a situation, and he said, well, what's the right answer to this situation? And I said, well, that's not really the point. There is no right answer for every situation, right? There's no one perfect way of dealing with something. There's actually lots of different ways of dealing with a situation. The purpose of these patterns is, again, to give you a starting point, right? A mechanism for thinking about how would I tackle this situation? You may, we also find that even when we start talking about all of these different techniques, they kind of converge on one approach, right? But they've at least gotten us to think about the situation differently and how we would deal with it differently. And I think this last one is really important, this idea of a comfort zone, right? A lot of us gravitate towards the same techniques over and over and over again because it's a comfortable place for us to be in. First time I gave this as a workshop, it was a half-day workshop at the IA Summit. I had one person in my workshop, and she said that her business partner used the same technique in every difficult situation. Literally the same technique. He would always say at the end of a conversation, well, I think we're agreed on this. Whether or not they were actually agreed or not, he would just say, I think we're agreed on this. And she said it led to some really, really further challenging situations because they would leave the room thinking they were agreed when they really weren't, right? Growth, personal growth, professional growth comes from getting out of your comfort zone. You may look at some of these patterns and say, I would not do that in a million years. That runs completely against the grain of my personality. But that may mean that's the thing you should try, right? That may mean that's the thing you should experiment with, because it takes the situation in a new direction. So I also counted all the techniques that I use and my colleagues use and my friends use, and there are a lot of them. There are even more than the situations, right? And those also ended up on cards. But there's lots and lots of different ways we can think about or deal with these techniques. As an interesting aside, my mother in her retirement became a mediator for the state of New York, which is a weird way to spend your retirement, yes. But she hears lots of different interesting cases, small claims cases. Anyway, she and I started talking about this because a lot of the techniques that have kind of grown up through mediation are things that we would use in collaboration, right? Things like, let me make sure I understood what you said, right? Reflecting something back to someone, that's classic mediation technique. I'm not saying you should use these in your personal relationships. That could be very difficult. And let's just say from personal experience, it doesn't always go well. I've been confronted with, are you using a pattern on me? Right, that's not, moving on. Because I'm an information architect, what did I do with them? I categorized them. It's like you just can't help yourself anymore. There comes a point where you're like, these things need to go into piles. The different patterns that we use, different techniques that we use kind of boil down to sort of 4 big ideas. One is involve, right? So someone is feeling disconnected from a project. You use one of these techniques to bring them back into the project, right? So this is one of my favorite ones at the top there is ask for help, right? So you're just simply saying, I need your help in working on this problem. It's hard for us to do as humans, competitive humans, but it is an important thing to do. And it brings people into the project. Empathize, putting yourself in their shoes, trying to create a connection to them and how they may be feeling and their relationship to the project. So the 2 up here are consider your work their work, right? This was something I got from a book called Mindset, where the author was suggesting that you remind yourself of what the other person's job is, right? You're trying to do your job, but put yourself in their shoes. What is their job? Their job may not be to do the thing that you're doing. It may be related, but different. Redirect. This is when they are focused on one thing and it may be the wrong thing, or you may be focused on the wrong thing. So you use one of these techniques to get them to focus on the right thing. And the last one here is called reframing. This is when you are speaking the wrong language, if that makes sense, right? You're positioning the problem in one way, and you can use these techniques to position the problem in a different way. So the example here is draw pictures. I was once helping a project team kind of get unstuck, and there were 2 people on the team and they were not cooperating. That is all I will say about that. And they were clearly speaking they weren't communicating well with each other. So I said, you know what, why don't you draw a picture of what you mean and you draw a picture of what you mean. And it was a very simple thing, but by trying to visualize what each of their positions was, it got them to see their relative positions completely differently. And it was a nice, simple exercise. It didn't take very long, but it helped deflate the situation. So are there any techniques that you use that you didn't see up here? Anything that you do to kind of help deal with a situation, get unstuck on a project? Scott, I think they're going to want you to use a mic. Will it reach? Will it reach? Will it reach? Thanks.
We do our best at my company to try to downsize the size of the teams working on projects, and we want the team to be comprised of people that actually want to do real work as opposed to people that just want to respond to things. And we find that dishing out real projects that require real time early on makes those teams get small quickly. And so that's been a technique that I've used for many years. Is making sure that people get real quickly so we can get to the right size team. Exactly. So yeah, I like that. Working group. I like that. I like that. Other techniques that you use?
It's amazing how much just listening to people, letting them vent their frustration, tell you their ideas, just having them feel heard is a form of communication. And it doesn't need to be anything that you even respond to, but just letting them talk. I've also found as a different approach, sometimes showing people, just starting with something really small and showing them what you're talking about as a way to get them to think about a problem differently. I find a lot of times clients are very bound in the reality that they currently experience, and they can't think about what's possible because they are so used to seeing an Excel spreadsheet as their solution. So it's hard for them to imagine what it could be.
I like both of those. Just listening is crazy good. When I was first moved to Washington, it must have been in my first or second year here, I was working for a large consulting company. and dealing with multiple projects at the same time, it was all very new to me. I was in my mid-20s, I guess. And I remember I was driving back from one client. I was driving through downtown DC, and I was trying to get back to my office. And I'd gotten this really nasty voicemail from one of my other clients. And I was scared I was like, what is going to happen? Are we going to lose this project? What's going on? So I called him back, and he sat there venting at me, not about me, but just venting. And I just realized he just wanted to make sure he was being heard, right? And it was such a little thing, but this lesson really stuck with me. I literally could not remember the guy's name, sadly, or what was so upsetting to him. But I think just knowing that there was someone there to listen to him was enormously important. Next time you're on a call or in a conversation, challenge yourself. Don't say anything for a moment. Other people in the room, presuming there are other people in the room, because that would just be weird. It's amazing how strong the urge is to fill silence. And it's amazing what people say when they have that opportunity. So thank you, Marcia, for sharing those. Those are really good. So let me cover this last leg of the stool here with my remaining time. We haven't talked a lot about these already, personality traits. And what I'm going to tell you is I'm not a big fan of Myers-Briggs. Oh, I've taken the online test. I just don't agree with it. I think it's really dangerous to put ourselves in boxes. And this comes from an information architect. But there's something about filing an index card in a category that's different from filing a human into a box, right? If you're a designer, maybe you're familiar with personas, right? This is a mechanism that we use to summarize everything we know about the target audience. And while I was working on my book about conflict and collaboration, someone suggested to me, why don't you create personas of the different kinds of people you find on design teams? And that really rubbed me the wrong way, because I think it does a disservice to our colleagues, right? It paints them in a very one-dimensional, two-dimensional way. And we're holistic, complicated beings, right? But that being said, certainly in my work as in client services, my work as a manager, it's been helpful to me to have a set of tools to try and understand people better. So like the patterns, like the situations, I've got a list of personality traits, things that I see in designers. And it may be better to think of these as preferences. So for example, this first one, we finally got some great insights from the stakeholders. This is actually something that someone once said to me on a project when I had been really wanting him to start designing 2 weeks ago, but he was really struggling to get going. And it was this moment, this one phone call with the stakeholders on the project that triggered his creativity, right? That triggered the flow of ideas. And this was a little piece of information that I now knew about this designer, right? For me, I know exactly what it is. You know, after going through a bunch of user interviews, I haven't even done any of the analysis, but just having gone through that process and hearing from people who are going to use this product potentially, that's enough to get me going, right? But it's going to be different for different people. And understanding what gets you going, what gets your team members going, can be really important to how you think about these projects. When people start at my company, we try and put them on 3 projects because we're really sort of testing them out a little bit. We want to get a sense of how much can they take, right? So understanding what your comfort zone is in terms of project load, it seems very tactical, right? This is not Myers-Briggs emotional or judgy, or, you know, it's just simply how much work can you handle? What is your sweet spot? Right? So it means if we're particularly busy at the moment and we put someone on 3 projects, but know they thrive on 2, we know that there's risk in front of us, right? We know how we need to deal with that we need to deal with that risk, not always how. So I call this project load, right? It's just simply, what do you know about you, yourself, but also your teammates in terms of what they can handle. One more here. I call this dogmatism. So the quote behind here is, we have to do usability testing in person. We cannot do it remote. Someone said it to me in this tone of voice too once. People get very dogmatic about different parts of the design process, of the whole creative process. They'll be dogmatic about how many people need to participate in testing or what a user interview needs to look like, right? There's lots of different things that we get dogmatic about. You should know this about the people on your team, because you may have to have a conversation with them about why you're not doing it that way. Or you may need to manage to this if you've got stakeholders on your project who have certain expectations. Traits are really interesting because they have a mutual impact on both the patterns that we choose, that is the techniques we use to deal with the situations. Traits also have a way of precipitating situations, right? Maybe Matt and I completely agree on how to do usability testing, right? But maybe I'm working with someone else who has a very particular idea. They are dogmatic about how they do usability testing. That's going to precipitate a situation that we're dealing with, right? I am terrible at talking on the phone. I hate talking on the phone. We can explore that till the cows come home, but I am not a phone call person. I don't mind doing video conferencing. I just don't like doing phone calls, right? That creates situations, that exacerbates communication issues, right? But that's something I know about myself and I manage to. By the same token, like we talked about before, you may play to your strengths in terms of the patterns that you choose. And this is really the key. We've talked a lot about how other people behave. We've talked a lot about assessing situations created by other people. We've talked about using patterns to deal with other people. But I think these traits, you can use them to look at your colleagues, but there's no more powerful mechanism than self-awareness here in the kind of work that we do. You can judge them all you want, but judge yourself with that same lens. Knowing your workload or what you are dogmatic about or what you care about or what sets you off or what rubs you the wrong way, all of those things are really, really important. About once a year, I have a particular client relationship that just is not working for one reason or another. And I remember a bunch of years ago, I was on this one project. I work from home in my basement. My wife also works from home 2 floors up. And I had this phone call and she was at my office door and she said, I could hear you yelling at that guy from all the way upstairs. And I realized he was getting under my skin in a way I didn't understand. But, and neither did she, but it was really important for me to think about this. Why did this bother me? Why did this particular conversation bother me so much? Why did this particular person bother me so much? We can dismiss it. We can say, oh, he's just a jerk. But that's not any way to get better at your own job. This is really the crux of collaboration. The crux of collaboration is understanding where you fit in, how you contribute to the process. We've been talking about conflict this whole time, and not one of you has asked me, what is conflict? It's okay. You'll still all pass the class. Don't worry about that. But conflict is a mechanism. It's an approach. Even though it feels negative sometimes, even though it feels hostile sometimes, at the end of the day, there is no value to conflict. It is neither good nor bad for the most part. Conflict isn't necessarily negative or turbulent. It's a process by which we come to a shared understanding. If the creative process is a collection of decisions, interrelated, interdependent decisions, then understanding each decision and why it's important and why we made it is crucial to make it to the next decision. Otherwise, you can't move your projects forward. Arriving at this shared understanding, it may be frustrating and it may be really tense, but it doesn't need to be personal. And honestly, your best tool for dealing with conflict is that self-awareness, is understanding what baggage you are bringing to the table, to mix my metaphors, that creates or solves that conflict. I'm going to sum up now. I'm going to step off the soapbox. There we go. Okay. So 3 things. Situations. You can think of them as either internal or external. The mechanism here is what's really causing this conflict, right? Is this something germane to the decision that I'm making? Or is it merely about, or is it also about how people are reacting to that decision? Do they feel disconnected from the project? Do they feel misunderstood? You can use a set of patterns, starting points. And again, the value here is you can use something that you know is reliable. You can come out of your meeting and say, I think we all agree on this. Or you can try something new. And I urge you, after your holiday weekend, to come back to the office on Tuesday or Wednesday if you're taking an extra day and try something new. Try something you haven't done before, whether that be just staying quiet in a meeting or picking up the phone and calling someone spontaneously to talk about something, some interpersonal collaborative approach that you haven't tried before. And the last is traits. And again, there are a number of different ways we can think about our teammates, but we need to take that magnifying glass on ourselves too. You need to ask yourself, why did I react this way in this situation? Why does this person get under my skin? What other hard questions have I not asked myself recently? And how can I be better as a contributor to the project? My work here is done. Do we have time for questions, Nick?
Yeah.
All right, so I've got a few minutes for questions or comments or thoughts or sharing stories. Or beat the bay traffic, Ray in the back.
Thanks, Dan. So design as a series of decisions. That's a very interesting definition of it. It's sort of a 2-part question. How do you not get overwhelmed by the sheer number of decisions that need to be done? And how do you track them in a meaningful way so that the collaboration makes sense when you're 3 steps down the line and someone says, but back then we ...
Right. So Ray's asking 2 questions about the idea of the design process as a collection of decisions. And this is no doubt an oversimplification of what design is, right? It's a convenient model that helps us think about the kinds of interactions that we have on projects. So I don't necessarily put a whole lot of stock in this is the one way to think about design, but you're right. The number of decisions that we make can be overwhelming. And a large source of our conflicts are we want to revisit the situation or decisions that we've made in the past. We want to revisit those decisions, either because we have new information or because we just plain old forgot what we decided earlier. That one happens a lot. I think it's important. I think this is why design expertise is really important, because understanding the right order for making those decisions is crucial, right? You can make decisions about the button labels, but you are making those in a vacuum. Right? It's important up front to make broader, more direction-setting type decisions to help feed those decisions down the road. And even though it feels like the number of decisions may be getting broader, because I need to decide not just that button label, but also that button label, in a sense, it's getting narrower because we've established a foundation, a set of criteria for making those decisions. By establishing a design direction, a vision for the project, that's what helps us focus those things. Good design projects also start with some mechanism for establishing objectives, criteria, all these other things that kind of help establish constraints around the project. As for revisiting decisions, I'm a big fan of documentation, right? The challenge is that our projects are becoming far more complicated. And so there are a lot more players. And because there are more players, things also tend to move a lot faster. right? We're moving a lot faster in the kinds of decisions. Taking a moment to put together a 75-page wireframes document is not the best way to capture those decisions as they're being dealt with on a daily, even hourly basis. That's a little bit harder. And I think a lot of teams are experimenting with lots of different kinds of tools that they can use to make sure the team stays up to date. Even email feels too slow these days. And there are lots of products that we're looking at and experimenting with that are things like Slack or HipChat, right? I hate to give you a tools-based answer, but I feel like it's a tactical question, right? Of how do we keep track of all these decisions? Those kinds of things to keep the team well in sync is probably the best bet. Thank you for your question. Other questions? Ray set the bar very high, I know, but Mars. You're very chatty. It's been a while since we've seen each other, so we got to catch up.
I really liked what you said about not putting designers into boxes or putting your team into boxes. And I found that it can be very helpful in the beginning of a meeting to set the context of we are ideating or we are really focused on a tactical problem, and telling people, tap into your inner creative problem solving, or we need to really be detail oriented and focus on how to move this forward in the next week. So I found that kind of the skills that you need in that meeting, you can, if you set the stage the right way, get people to bring that to the table.
Yeah, I love the idea of setting the right tone for the meeting, because, and this has come up a few times even this week, helping people understand what hat they need to wear at a meeting, right? So I've even done this just with myself, where I kind of set my mind at ease by saying, okay, is this a listening exercise or is this a talking exercise? Just before a conference call or whatever, I just set my expectation of, okay, what am I supposed to be doing here? Okay, it's a listening exercise. That means get the question generator on, right? Or it's a talking exercise. Let me write down the 3 main points that I want to make sure I want to hit in this. Doing that in a group. The way I've been positioning this more recently is, here's what I want to get out of this meeting. And in order to get that out of this conversation, you may need to lower your expectations about, or lower your expectations about the constraints that we have, or ignore the way things are today, or draw pictures, right? Because we don't usually draw pictures. So giving people those tools at the outset and in a sense priming them for for the kind of participation that you're expecting works really well. Other questions? You're all on vacation right now. You're all picturing your drive to the Outer Banks. Oh,
a card up there, and I think it was on redirecting, and it was baby steps.
Oh, it's one of my favorites.
I didn't know what that was, and I apologize for coming in late. I wouldn't normally ask.
Well, it's all we covered in the very beginning was baby steps. I'm just kidding. So baby steps is one of the patterns that we use, and it's one of my favorites because it's usually things that people can relate to. I'll tell you the story of where it started. I was at a government agency whose initials are, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to tell you. So I was at a government agency, and I was working for a person who, it was at the very beginning of user experience design. And this person wanted to do everything, like literally everything that they read in that interaction book, that 600-page interaction. They wanted to bring all those methodologies to bear. And I'm like, we need to take baby steps, right? Let's just maybe have a brainstorming session. Doesn't take up a whole lot of time. It doesn't necessarily disrupt their flow that they're in, their process that they're in. So you could think of it as sort of a change management technique, right? When you're trying to bring about a change, either at an organization or just a project level, or just, even in this particular task, instead of trying to make the whole change, just take a baby step in the right direction. I was having lunch with someone with some nice people beforehand, and one of them was telling me a story of, I'm in this for the long haul. So I don't need to make every last change in the scope of this 3-month contract. I've got time. to slowly adjust the dial, move the needle was, I think, the phrase that we used, right? So that's how I would say. Is that a good description? Does that answer your question? Okay. Other questions? Guys, Ray has another question. So I'm just saying, now is your time if you want to. Go ahead, Ray.
Okay. This is a conversation about collaboration. During the conversation, you identified yourself using two different words. You said, I am an information architect.
I did.
You said, I am a designer.
Yes, I did.
So I want to focus on the concept of roles within the construct of collaboration. So the previous, I forget your name. Marcy was bringing up, this is really kind of piggybacking on what she was saying, in that you guys were talking about, you set up a meeting and you say, this is what I'm trying to get out of the meeting, or this is, you're trying to set a context and you're trying to enable a creative space for people. But without constraining them to their roles. Yet at the end of the process, different people have different deliverables that need to be produced. So in a way, they're kind of roles-based. So can you talk a little bit around where roles and collaboration and getting things done all sort of come together?
Great. So the way I took Marcy's question was, I've got a room full of myriad stakeholders of variation. Maybe there are different levels in the organization. Maybe they have different day jobs than the ones that most of us do. So I took her question to mean I'm trying to set their expectations of, you can shed some of those things aside. But let's look at a different scenario, right? I'm also a guy who, there are lots of labels I can apply to myself, but I'm a guy who leads design teams, right? And when a design team does have different roles, because we have different peoples with different people with different kinds of expertise. The best, most effective projects that I've worked on are one, actually Matt and I worked on this one a couple years ago, where I think, and he can keep me honest here, everyone knew what their role was, their contribution was. Everyone knew what they were accountable for on the project. And I think that's a different approach. So we were working on a project. Matt was doing UI and prototyping. I was the lead. We had an information architect and a visual designer, right? We all knew what our strengths and weaknesses were. We all knew that ultimately my role was to arbitrate decisions as the lead. But I also, as the lead, became the guy who knew the most about the business requirements of the client. But our visual designer was the final word on what visual designs we were presenting. I gave him a lot of feedback and I critiqued a lot of the work that he was doing, but ultimately it was him who was responsible for, accountable for what we were showing. So I think there's, your question is complex and has lots of layers, but what occurs to me is this distinction between when you've got a core team who's structured, or my experience is, I've got a core team structured to deliver something. The most effective collaboration has a lead, but also has people who know what they're accountable for. And things break down when people are not aware of what they're going to be accountable for. I call myself an information architect because even though I'm also a lead on projects, that's often the role, that my contribution to the projects is, here's what I think the navigation or the structure of the site is going to look like. So I think there are ways in which we carve out those spaces for ourselves on project in order to be efficient and effective. And that's all I got. Go ahead.
So you sort of ended up, it sounded to me, in a similar space to where my headspace went, which was on the deliverable side, on the accountable side, on the end point. It's, I guess where I'm trying to understand, and it's a struggle and it's something that dealing with in real time, is in that creative space, in the collaboration space, not to put too fine a point on it, but how does a designer talk with an information architect, talk with a copywriter across the role boundary and be contributive without stepping on toes and end up with a better product at the end?
I've been reading I will try and answer that question as concisely as possible because it's complicated. You're talking about and one copy, one content strategist is going to be different from another one, right? So we have different dynamics, right? And that's fine, right? That's what the traits are for, is understanding how these people like to work so you can find ways to work well together. I've been reading Creativity Inc. by the Pixar guy. You should read it. It's quite good. Ed Catmull is the author's name. And I'm right in the middle of the chapter where he's talking about the brain trust. This is at Pixar. When they're working on a new movie, do you watch Pixar movies?
Yes.
So many Pixar movies. Anyway, so they're good, which is good. So they're working on a new movie. The director will bring wherever they're at to the table. And it's like 30 people in this brain trust. I think the name of the meeting is terrible, but there's 30 people, and they all, whether they're producers or directors or writers or animators, they've earned a spot in this room, and they all can be honest. And actually the word he uses is candor, right? Honesty, there's a value associated with it. Candor is being direct and clear and upfront and, again, truthful about your reaction to the movie. So I think when I'm collaborating with a visual designer, say, or a writer, right? We are, in a sense, even though I may be the lead on the project, I'm providing direction to them and feedback and critique, and they trust me to be candid with them in their feedback, even though ultimately they may be accountable for the deliverable, or at least responsible for the deliverable. We are making use of each other in the way that this brain trust makes use of each other to make the product better. And that's as much as I'm good for before a holiday weekend. So do we have time for one more, or are we done? Any other questions? I know Ray has set the bar really high. So, well, guys, you've been great. Thank you very much for your time. Actually, stand by. I always forget this part. So you can learn more. I wrote a lot about this stuff in a book called Designing Together. I've got a copy up here if you want to take a look at it. You can find more about the book or these cards at designingtogetherbook.com. That's me. I love talking about this stuff. So if you want to just drop me a line or drop me a tweet on Twitter, please, let's talk about the situations that you're facing. I'm working on a new book, and I'd love your feedback and input. And if you want to just be aware of when that book comes out or where it's at, you can go to j.mp/design discovery book and give me your contact information. And now I am done. Thanks, guys, for coming today. I appreciate it.